Good morning. It is Friday. It is so much Friday. And here in Southern California, the winds have stopped, for which I am so extremely grateful. Welcome to Humor, Grace, and Grief on Facebook and the Friday Grief Chat, which is hosted on Humor, Grace, and Grief. We also have a podcast that goes up on all the podcast platforms. And on that podcast, we have, I'm trying to bring Deb on right now. Um, we have it listed as Humor, Grace, and Grief. And you can find us on all the places, including Spotify. Hooray for Spotify. We'd love it if you'd follow us. We'd love it if you give us some stars, maybe even write a nice review saying these two grief chicks are absolutely nuts, but a lot of fun to listen to, and I learn a lot. Right? Welcome, Deb. Welcome back to Illinois from Oregon. Let me see if I can hear you.
Thank you. You know, I have to tell you that Facebook asks for a pin, then they ask for this, and I'm like, go away, go away, go away. So I apologize for my lateness. I'm like,
It's okay. I was a little panicked myself because I switched to my brand new computer that I got for Christmas, but I had been holding off because there's all that IT switching. But I am on my brand new, thank you to my wife, 17-inch HP Envy, and the screen is
ooh,
just so big,
oh,
and I
that's
can see
beautiful.
everything. So
Can
I
you
was hoping it was going to work well.
can you see me okay? Is that
I
is that
can
an
see you
okay picture?
perfect. Yep,
All right.
absolutely,
There you go. And let me just bend
absolutely.
that a little bit. And there you go. Now I have hair.
Oh, I don't, but that's okay.
I love it. I love it.
Well, welcome back. We missed Deb the last week because she was in the wilds of the Pacific Coast, the most beautiful part of it in Oregon and Washington a little bit. God,
I
love that area.
it was great. And then last week was a travel day. Um, and like many people, the storms just say, we don't think so. So, um, yeah, so that's where I was last Friday doing the travel dance of hurry up and wait. And
There's
it
some
would have
grief
been sort of
involved in that.
interesting. Uh, yes. And, I talked to a lot of people about grief on my vacation. And, you know, um, just listing all of the sort of hurry up and wait for lab results. Hurrying up, there's a loss. There's a loss of, well, I don't know who I am until the lab tells me who I am.
A lab
Isn't
is going to define you.
I yes, I have to give a sample of my toenail, and and it's going to tell me what I have and how we identify with our body. And
Yeah,
when the body isn't working, wow, that's a big grief. That's a loss
it is a
when
huge loss.
it is. So,
When things are not working well, or you're someone who needs meds and you have to change meds, or even when the manufacturer changes and then all of a sudden things aren't working as well as they should be.
that's right.
And I posted when I was getting ready for today, we're going to talk about grief is weird. And grief is weird.
Grief
Grief is
is
when
so weird.
you don't know when it's going to come around. You don't know how it's going to show up.
Hmm.
You've had this loss before, but even still, it feels weirder this time than last time. Even if you're someone
Hmm.
who deals with medical stuff, when something new medical comes up, then that feels weird too, right? There's
Yes.
the grief
And
just does whatever grief is going to do whenever grief damn well pleases.
and a social worker was asking me something the other day, and I go, who doesn't need psychological help? For real? Like everybody does at some time. And grief, this is something I'm paying attention to more. You know, when people have the last remaining parent die, and so it's different than before when they had the other parent die, because there's griefs compounded. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Or like this, so it forms its own entity. And a lot of people say, maybe 3 months out, I'm better. Yet, I mean, the grief doesn't hit me as hard. I'm more tired. I'm sure you hear that from your clients
Different
too.
symptoms than I did the last time. The other thing I hear about stuff
Right.
like that is it makes those anniversary days, whatever anniversaries you tend to practice in your home,
Mm-hmm.
weird. And if you've lost one parent, but now you've lost two, then the birthdays or the anniversary can seem more poignant or more difficult. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it can may if you've lost one sibling, but now you've lost a parent that you shared the history with the sibling with, that makes those things. The compounding comes in a variety of places. And it
Right.
doesn't mean it's
Right.
pathological. Don't hear me saying complicated grief
Right.
disorder.
Right.
Hear me
Right. No.
saying it makes it feel like, but I thought I had this under control. And grief is the ultimate loss of control. You can't
Right.
you can't take back which has been taken from you. What
Absolutely. And the one of the things I hear over and over is, oh, I think I'm done with this part now. And I go, I usually, I'm listening, but I'll tell you, I I don't always want to say anything. It's sort of like, I don't want to tell people ahead. I have a couple people said, sometimes the second year is actually harder than the first. And
Mhm.
I just sort of throw that out there, not to tell them you will have these symptoms, like side effects. I'm not, I'm good. I'm not that good to tell you what's happening. And I just sort of wait. I've been doing more waiting when people talk to me about grief. And it's if you listen to a lot of grief as a neighbor or whatever, make sure you have somebody else to tell your griefs to. I think that's really important
The
because,
companioning.
right, misery does not love company when you're going through different parts. It's of grief, okay? And because then you start to compare, right? Oh,
Right?
yeah. Yeah. So, someone like you whose mom died a year ago, less than a year ago, right? And, you know, um, and Steve, I'm just going to use you as an example. And let's say Steve is going through some grief right now. He might not say to you, oh, yeah, I'm going through this right now too, and blah, 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 because he wants to focus in on you as a friend, right?
Right.
So
And
he
puts his
might
own
tell,
stuff back.
yeah, he puts his own stuff back and he'll say, I think I'm going to call up Deb. Deb, I just need to unload for a second. And that is the kind thing to do. You know, I think it's important to call attention to that so
To give
that,
space to the active mourner. Mhm.
or the more recent
Or
mourner.
recent mourner. Unless the recent mourner draws you in and says, "You know what? I know this is probably much like what you have experienced. How are you?" And that's the yes, please. That may be show me where I'm going. That may be tell me what to expect. That may
Or
be I share your pain.
or maybe it's I I really need to be distracted. Please tell me about this stuff going on in your life because I'm sick of hearing about my own.
Right. There's that
Yeah,
too. There's
and
all
that
kinds of things that get in the way.
mhm.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and to add to that, Jill, and you can expound on this, I just at my grief group the other day, I almost heard one of them say something about the stages or something. And I go,
Oh.
let me be perfectly clear that Kubler-Ross meant that only for the dying.
And as an
Didn't,
educational example,
yes, not about the people who were left behind.
it's not a
So,
definition of grief.
mm-mm.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. I totally am there with you. It's the I tend to try to help some of the folks I work with look at grief as the active process of doing the work of what's left, what needs to be done, what didn't get done, what decisions do you need to make to decide how you're going to take back some control now that control has been taken with whatever this loss is.
mm-hmm,
How do you take back that control? And how
mm-hmm,
do you then make that into this life that you are now living, not your new life, the life you're now living? And then divide that from when you have the moments where you just feel like crap, where you're just really missing them, making that missing, not grieving so much.
mm-hmm.
I've done the grief work, but I'm gonna miss them sometimes. Yesterday was my first wife Linda's 72nd birthday, and she made it to 58 by a matter of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took flowers to the cemetery, and it was poignant. It wasn't painful, right? It was
Mm-hmm.
birthdays should never have to be celebrated in a cemetery. That's just not, how you anticipate life to be with anybody in your life, not your brother, not your sister, not your parent, even though you know they're going to die, not anybody. But it wasn't that painful, rending of the
Renting of
clothing.
the cloth,
It wasn't that. It was
garments.
just, yes, it was just, I need to honor it's your birthday and I wish that you'd gotten to see 72. I'm now older than you were when you died. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's that kind of thing, but that's not grieving. It's you miss their active presence in your life, but you're grateful for the fact that they were there.
I'm going to add to that
Please
because
do.
my mom's the actual day she died is March 13th, a couple days ago. And according to the Jewish calendar, she died on what they call the night before, Erev Purim.
Oh,
And so, yeah, so I went and I bought two yahrzeit candles because I've said this before. I find it interesting that there's about 16 days apart from my mother and father's birthday, and there's about 16 days apart from when they died in March.
symmetry there is kind of
I
cool,
know. Do do do
right?
do 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 do. So here's what I did. Even though my dad's actual date of when he died is like March 28th or something like that, somewhere around there, that there is, I get two yahrzeit candles and I always light them when my mom died. And I go, Mom and Dad, this is for you. This is your death anniversary month.
Death anniversary.
Death anniversary. Yay. And and I allowed myself to just revel in some memories. I didn't have any tears or anything like that. that's, I think, the difference between missing them and a grief moment.
Mhm.
And, I think about that. Grief is almost a body thing that comes out in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes it might come out as tears, sometimes it might come out as anxiety. This is grief. Sometimes there's, you know, like a whole body thing that happens near an anniversary. I forgot my dad's death anniversary for many years. I mean, and then all of a sudden I have a reaction. That's the cellular memory. And that's almost like internalized grief. So the reason why I'm saying all of this is, maybe you can expound a little bit on what's the difference between missing someone and actual grief or grieving. So, yeah.
Absolutely. My wife realized last week, 2 days after her mom's death anniversary, that she had forgotten it. And she's not one who remembers. She does not mark death anniversaries. She marks birthdays and holidays, but not death anniversaries. But she said, you know what? No wonder I've been feeling a little down in the chops and a little weird and having all these memories that I would prefer not to have. And that now it makes sense
Mm-hmm.
because our bodies and our brains do remember in some place and they need a place to mark it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how one of the ways grief is weird. And so
Mm-hmm.
one of the ways to handle that is to make sure you've got it on a calendar so you
Yeah.
can see it's coming,
Right.
right?
Right.
I have paper calendars in several places in the house, but then I have a master work calendar and everything goes on there because I was doing a Google calendar and then an EHR calendar for work and then this. That is too much. That's like trying to remember passwords.
Yes.
That's not going to happen. I'm not going to check 2 electronic calendars a day. So everything goes on the work calendar. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it makes people a little bit nervous because I've got so many of those anniversaries on there and so many
Mm-hmm.
birthdays for dead people.
Mm-hmm.
But that's for me. That's
Yeah.
because I need to prepare for them, not because I need anyone else to mark the day. It's
That's
just because I need to make sure
absolutely
that
right.
I'm aware of it and ready for it.
Right. You
Right?
know, it's, I'm reading also Steve's note about his
Mhm.
husband that passed. And, happy wearing of the Green Day. And they, that's how, and I'm sure he couldn't do it the very moment Harrell died. But, you know, it's, later on, you can perfect how you do the death anniversary.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And you can perfect how you remember people and
Yeah.
in grief, in all the weirdness that grief is. And because Harrell was of British origin, it makes
Mhm.
sense for him to do the whole wearing of the green. And
Mhm.
we will probably be joining them depending on how our day goes tomorrow. And I'll be wearing of the green with a little bit of the yellow and the blue because, of course, we conquered Ireland as the Vikings are up to do. So,
You are hilarious.
it was ours first,
Oh
right?
my goodness. Yes, 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 yes.
And all the Norse mixed with all the Irish lore. Yeah.
You know, um, some one of my doctors said this to me yesterday because oops, sorry, that was my cat's tushy.
Ah,
Um, that I have recently given up my leadership role at
in
our
your church.
church.
Hmm.
And this doctor said, so now are you going to fill it up with a bunch of other stuff? And I said, no, keep the other things I have,
Yay!
but I am not looking to fill up something. I want to be with some of the emptiness,
Yeah.
some of the silence, because that gives me, honest reflection time. And, when I was in uh, Oregon, so the storms come through, the cable goes out, so there's no TV, right? And so I decided in the evenings I would do some artwork. I had some 3x5 watercolor paper postcards and a couple 3x5 canvases. And, even those 3x5 canvases each one takes at least a couple hours because it's a certain laying down of colors. But then I have to allow myself time to look at what the colors are telling me, if that makes sense. I'm combining some sentences, but
Yes.
and some senses. I have to look in order to hear and to see. And when someone dies, that's that's once I get past the sadness and the immediate overflowing of feelings,
Mm-hmm.
I can reflect and without the physical upsets. It's like there's more space created.
You
And
can
that's
take a
not a
step back.
bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's uncomfortable to sit with your thoughts. And sometimes you're grateful you get to sit with your thoughts. Does that make
I
sense,
find it
Judy?
does, and it gives you then space to express those thoughts in a way that makes sense for you.
Exactly. The way it makes sense for you, whether it's your sense of humor. Um, I know I made many jokes after my mom died, and I wasn't denying that she died. I wasn't even not being in touch with my feelings. I was very in touch. But there was a certain release and relief also, you know.
Mhm. You know,
Not,
we take our students to volunteer at two programs for homeless folks every week with
mm,
our nonprofit. And last night was the one where homeless families are housed in a series of churches. They go from church to church every 1 month to 3 months. They switch churches because the community doesn't particularly want homeless people to have housing in their neighborhood, just someplace else, please. And so we had some new families last night, and we work primarily with the kiddos and with kiddos and parents. We do skills building, but we had some really artistic kiddos last night. And the way they express what they have been through
mm-hmm.
is through art. One is an amazing artist. She does charcoal sketches like an adult would be envious to be able to do.
Oh, wow.
And the little ones were doing it with torn paper and making torn paper collages.
Mm-hmm.
And they created it. They made that decision. They had scissors and they made the decision to do it that way. They needed the tactile.
Yes, yes.
And they weren't given an assignment to draw what they were feeling. We don't go there.
Mm-hmm.
They decided to do it.
Mm.
And then
Wow.
two others with music. And those guys speak a different language, come from a different place,
Mm-hmm.
but identified with one of our counselors who also comes from a different place, but different from theirs. But they all identify with music from yet a different country. And
Great.
that's where they connected on their losses, is the music from that other country and that other kind of genre. And in one small room, less than 10 kids, 5 different ways to express grief,
Wow.
right? And none of it was because of deaths. It was loss of homes, loss of schools, loss of neighborhood, loss of family, loss of dignity, right? Loss of
Mhm.
pets, all the things that happen when you lose your home. And
Yes.
there they were. And one of them draws a certain kind of pet constantly because they miss that kind of pet. And that is the grief process. Grief is weird. It allows itself to come out in the space where you have to do it, when you
Mhm.
have the time and the depth and the ability to put it down.
Two things I would add to I would ask of that. One, sometime in the future, can you show us some of those pictures? I'm sure you took pictures of pictures.
Can't because of confidentiality, but I wish
Oh,
I could. Oh my gosh, the
oh,
shading, it looked like almost a black and white photograph.
got it. Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
it was incredible.
Wow.
And
How old was that
it
child?
was a child not yet even in junior high.
Wow.
Right.
I am duly impressed as a
Yeah.
former art teacher.
I
Yeah.
it I can't even draw a stick figure. My stick figures go sideways.
Oh, I totally get it. You
Right?
know, the other thing, the reason why grief is weird is when it pops up when you least expect it. And grief, not just having a thought about missing a person, but that body grief where all of a sudden your eyes start squirting, or
Mhm.
you start getting highly anxious because you're smelling perhaps a cologne that a loved one wore, or
Right.
you're or you're or there's a certain fruit. And I tell everybody right before my TEDx talk, I'm in the grocery store in the coffee aisle, and a thought pops into my head like, would my mom be proud of me or something? And my eyes just start squirting. So I go, okay, what's the lie I'm going to tell people here? Because I can't stop what's happening. Right.
Right.
And it's so annoying.
Do
And
you just tell them you're missing your mom?
you know what? I didn't feel like I could. So I said, okay, anybody asks, it's allergies, and my eyes are just watering uncontrollably. That's interesting. I never even considered telling the stranger or the people coming through what what was happening. I don't know. Maybe now I would. I mean, that was 5 years ago,
Mhm.
right?
A little bit closer to the loss.
Yeah, yeah. But
Because,
wow.
it's interesting when you do grief work, you tend to have that
Mhm.
big G on your forehead.
Yeah.
And folks, it's for grief, not gay for me. Okay, it's grief. Um, and and people will just sit and tell you their losses. I have never gone to a
Right,
conference and not ended up in a conversation with the Uber or Lyft driver
right.
about the losses that they've experienced. I've never been in an airport and not had someone tell me about their loss. And to be clear, I'm
Yeah,
okay with that. I
yeah.
am honored that anyone would trust me with
Mhm.
that loss and with those feelings and
You
with
know,
sharing that person. But we
both on
don't
the
share ours.
I do you know going out to Oregon. Yeah, yeah. Going out to Oregon, the second leg of the trip was all about this woman was crying next to me, and she kept like covering her eyes, and I couldn't let that just like have someone cry next to me without saying. And I asked very gently, is there anything I can do to help?
Mhm.
Or are you okay? And of course she said, I'm fine. I get very anxious on a plane, and my husband is sitting 10 rows back because this was a last minute seat. And I go, well, if you need to hold my hand, here it is. And then I talked about deep breathing, and then I told her some other things, and I told her about grief. And then, like you said, all of a sudden, she started telling me about her family.
It
And
happens every time.
you know what? I don't mind that either.
Right. Right.
Because don't you feel like when they're total strangers, you're in the right place at the right time? Because this is needed even for a moment.
I do, and I frequently find that I find widows and widowers next to me on planes who are
Hmm.
on their first flight where they used to hold the hand of their spouse to get through takeoff and landing
Yes.
and through, turbulence. And you can just see them. Their hand is going and you can see it's looking for the hand that's missing,
Right.
right?
Right.
I mean, how many of you do that? Like you need that hand to grab when things are going terribly wrong on a plane or even when you're just taking off because you are taking this ginormous plane into thin air. Like I know physics supports it, but Boeing's had some trouble recently. So I look at them and I say, do you need a hand to hold? It looks like you're missing someone. And immediately the
Yeah.
story comes out and I remember being in that spot too, right? You are on that first flight and they are not there. And the best you can do is say, okay, I do have a belief in an afterlife. I would really, really like it if you'd make sure those thrusters are working well and that the brakes have been checked. Right? And keep an eye on me till we get back down. All the way down on the ground properly.
I confess that I have been flying since I was 7, and no parent held my hand. And so only once, when turbulence were so bad that the seatbelt was keeping me in my seat, did I have the urge to hold on to the person next to me.
Oh, see you. I'm so impressed. My first flight, my dad took me on a business trip just to Northern California. And we're in Southern California. And so each of us got a first flight experience. And absolutely, there was a hand, his big hand just grabbed and held our little paw. And we each did it independently. We each got our own. He did it 3 times. And so
Mhm.
I was brought up that we didn't fly much, but if you flew, you had a hand to hold. And
Oh,
then
wow.
every spouse since then has been subjected to the Jill death grip. If I'm flying alone, I can do the breathing, but if I've got a victim next to me, that person will have their hand squished. That's all there is to it because grief is weird
Oh,
and you need to
oh,
have someone to hold on to, right?
that's I have held other people's hand who was nervous in my,
Mhm.
in my row. And but I have never Daryl and I sometimes I just reach over and touch him, but like I said, I grew up with no hand holding.
Yeah, you and
So
Stacy the same. Yep, and she's
yeah.
used to flying independently. Jill, not so much. I'm a social worker. I like that human touch. Yes, I do.
That's
Yeah,
great.
need to touch and hold. All right. Well, folks, go out and do your grief weirdly, proudly. Talk about it. I did want to say, Deb, the one time I see grief folks actually acknowledging their own losses in an emotional basis in public is when we go to conferences. Most grief conferences have a memorial at the end.
Yes.
At ADEC, they remember those who were part of the ADEC or part of the grief and loss and and thanatology stuff in the world. At the International Death, Grief, and Bereavement Conference, we acknowledge those people, but you can also acknowledge your own personal losses. And
Yes.
and you
I
can sit and
appreciate
hear
that.
the loss. You can and the tears are acceptable and people are supportive and it's not that thing because we all in grief work support people showing their emotions, but we tend to lock down. And
Yes.
I think that's the weirdness of grief. And I think if we could take the lead and in sharing the loss and in sharing the emotion and in sharing the experience and in sharing the person.
You know, when I don't usually do this at church, what I like to do is when we light the candle, I say this is in memory of, or I light another candle. But when my Uncle Erwin died, who was like a father to me all the years that my dad had been gone, that he worked in the TV and movie industry. So he had a jacket from working on the show Highway to Heaven. And so I hung that on a chair and I put a candle there, and I shared that with everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, you should be able to do that. I was offered to guest preach at some point at our church. So I don't know when, because the first offering date was a date I'm going to be out of the country, but you know. So next week, it looks like we're going to have Talia Bambola, who is a therapist who is a totally rocking, awesome young therapist. I'm actually old enough to be her mother, I will confess. She has products she's developed to poke fun at therapists and the industry, but she also has the experience of so many losses and industrial losses. So we're going to bring her on board, and I'm getting the high sign that I need to get to my next client. So we will see you guys next week.
All right. Bye,
Bye, everybody.
Good to be back.